Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog. When I'm at the end of a project, like my swaying palm shawl, I think it can be worth the time to add a special finishing touch. That's why I featured a decorative Picot Bind Off for this design. Today, I'd like to show you how to do this fancy finish, and make sure you stay tuned to the end because I'll be telling you how to modify the height of the picots and the spacing between them. Let's get started. Before we begin, if you enjoy our videos, consider joining the pack and becoming a member of thechilidog.com for ad-free access to our entire learning library, priority support, and more. Today I'll be demonstrating on a small swatch rather than my full shawl, and I'm using a cast on 2 bind off 4 Picot bind off. I'll start by binding off one stitch using a plain bind off. So that just means I'm going to knit the first 2 stitches and bind off one stitch by passing the first stitch up and over the second stitch. From this point, I'm basically just going to cast on 2 stitches and then bind off 4 stitches. Before I can cast on, I need to slip the stitch from my right needle to my left without twisting it. And then I'll use a plain knit cast on to cast on my 2 stitches. So insert the needle knitwise, wrap the yarn, and pull a stitch through, leaving the stitch on the left-hand needle, and slip the new stitch from the right to the left without twisting. Insert your needle knitwise, wrap your yarn, pull the stitch through, and slip that new stitch from right to left without twisting. Some knitters prefer to twist the stitch and slip it knitwise from right to left. That's perfectly fine. You'll create a slightly different look. Just be consistent as you are casting on your stitches for the entire bind off and always slip in the same manner. So I cast on my 2 stitches. Now it's time to bind off 4 using a plain bind off. And that begins by knitting 2 stitches, bind off 1 by passing over, knit and bind off 2 by passing over, knit, bind off number 3, knit, and bind off stitch number 4. And repeat the process until you get to the end of the row. When I get to my final stitches, I continue in the same manner. I slip that stitch from the right to the left, cast on 2, bind off 4, and I'm left with one final loop on my right-hand needle. At this point, you could cut your yarn, which I've already done here just to speed things up, and pull your yarn tail through that final loop to fasten things off. If you'd like to customize your Picot bind off for a project, here are 3 helpful tips. Tip number 1. The height of your picot is determined by how many stitches you cast on. So if you just cast on 1 stitch, you'll get a tiny little picot bump. I cast on 2 stitches, so my picot's a little taller. The more stitches you cast on, the longer and the more fringe-like the picot becomes. Tip number 2. The distance between your picots is the difference between the number of bound off stitches and the number of cast on stitches. So for my shawl, I bound off 4 and cast on 2. 4 minus 2 is 2, and I have 2 stitches between each picot. Tip number 3, to make sure that your bind off ends in the right place with the last stitch of the row, your row needs to be a multiple of the distance between your picots plus 2 stitches. So for example, if, like for my shawl, you wanted your picots to be 2 stitches apart, your row would need to be any multiple of 2 stitches long, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, etc., plus 2 more stitches. So essentially that's any even number of stitches. If instead you wanted your picot to be spaced 3 stitches apart, your row would need to be any multiple of 3 stitches long, so 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, etc., plus 2 more stitches. I hope you enjoyed learning how to do a picot bind off and how to customize it to suit your project. If you did, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your knitting friends. If you'd like to try this technique in a pattern, head over to the shop section of thechilidog.com and look for our swaying palms shawl. Until we stitch again, happy knitting.